She sold over 6 million copies of one single song. She had a voice you could recognize into seconds out of millions of singers on the planet. And yet, almost nobody, including her own fans, knows the real story behind how that voice came to exist. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't training. It was an accident, one she wasn't even supposed to survive as a singer at all. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll never hear Total Eclipse of the Heart the same way again. Let's start with the name. The woman the world knew as Bonnie Tyler was never born Bonnie Tyler. She came into the world as Gaynor Hopkins, in a small Welsh village called Skewen, born into a working-class family that had nothing close to the glamour people assume comes with global fame. Nobody handed her a career. She left school at just 16 years old without qualifications after years of being bullied for wearing her sister's hand-me-down uniforms. Picture that for a second. The woman who would go on to headline arenas, who would have Eurovision audiences on their feet, started out as a teenage girl mocked in a school hallway for wearing someone else's clothes. So, how does a bullied teenager from a small Welsh town become one of the most recognizable voices in music history? She didn't wait for someone to discover her. She went out and found the nightlife circuit in South Wales, singing in pubs and clubs while working ordinary day jobs just to get by, including time behind a supermarket till, while other people her age were figuring out what they wanted to do with their lives. She was already living two lives at once, cashier by day, singer by night, chasing something most people around her probably thought was a fantasy. Here's where it gets strange. Before she ever became Bonnie Tyler, she performed under a completely different name, Shireen Davis. Why hide her real identity? Because there was already another rising Welsh singer named Mary Hopkin, and she didn't want to be confused with her. When she eventually signed with RCA Records in the mid-1970s, the label had her sit down and build a stage name almost like a puzzle, pulling first names and surnames straight out of a newspaper until something clicked. That combination became Bonnie Tyler, a name manufactured quite literally out of newsprint. But none of that is the real twist. The real twist is about her voice, and this is the part almost nobody knows. In 1976, Tyler had just broken through with a song called Lost in France, climbing to number 9 on the UK charts and landing her a spot on top of the pops. It should have been the beginning of a clean, easy rise to fame. Instead, almost immediately after the song took off, she started developing a persistence or throat that wouldn't go away. Doctors examined her and found nodules on her vocal cords, a condition caused by vocal strain, common among singers who push themselves too hard, too fast. It's the kind of diagnosis that can end a singing career before it even starts. She needed surgery to remove them. And after the operation, her doctors gave her one instruction and only one: complete vocal rest for 6 weeks. No singing, no talking, not even whispering. Now imagine being a rising singer at the exact moment your career is finally taking off and being told you're not allowed to speak for 6 weeks. For most people, that would already sound impossible. For Tyler, it was worse because her career was accelerating in real time, and every day of silence felt like a day she was losing. She couldn't do it. She broke the instructions. She spoke. And by her own account, one day the frustration boiled over completely and she screamed. That single moment changed everything. Her specialist told her, almost in disbelief, that she had gone and done it now, that her voice was going to be permanently huskier because of what she'd just done to her healing vocal cords. She went back into the recording studio not long after, and the people in that room did not recognize the voice coming out of her. The smooth, sweet voice that carried Lost in France was gone. In its place was the smoky, raw, powerful rasp that the entire world would come to know. Think about what that actually means. The most iconic voice of an entire era of music, the voice behind Total Eclipse of the Heart and Holding Out for a Hero, was never a natural gift. It was never something a vocal coach designed. It was the result of a medical accident that could have destroyed her career entirely and instead reshaped it into something unrepeatable. And here's where fate steps back in. Around this time, songwriter and producer Jim Steinman was riding a wave of success after writing Meat Loaf's mammoth hit album, Bat Out of Hell. Tyler had seen Meat Loaf perform live, and something about the operatic, larger-than-life sound of that music told her Steinman was the one person who could write for the voice she now had. So she chased him down. Her own label had doubts about the pairing. She pushed anyway. Steinman eventually agreed to meet her, and what came out of that meeting became one of the defining songs of the entire decade. Total Eclipse of the Heart wasn't written for just any voice. Steinman built it, note by note, as a showcase for the exact grit and power that her surgery recovery had left behind. He once described the song as a Wagnerian-like onslaught of sound and emotion. It went on to sell more than 6 million copies, dominate charts on both sides of the Atlantic, and become one of the best-selling singles ever recorded. Try to picture that song sung in her old, sweet, pre-surgery voice. It doesn't work. It couldn't have worked. The accident that almost ended her career is the exact same accident that made her unforgettable. Steinman didn't stop there. He also gave her Holding Out for a Hero, a song that would find an entirely new life years later on the Footloose soundtrack, and then again in commercials, movies, and internet culture for decades afterward. Few voices in music history are recognizable within 2 seconds of a song starting. Hers was one of them, and it happened because of 6 weeks of broken vocal rest instructions in 1976. There's a detail from even earlier in her life that almost never gets mentioned, and it's the kind of detail that makes the whole story hit differently. Her very first public performance wasn't rock music at all. It was the hymn All Things Bright and Beautiful, sung as a child in a small Welsh chapel. The same voice that would later belt out lyrics in front of stadiums full of people started out singing quietly in a place of worship with no audience beyond her own community. And it wasn't some instant, obvious talent either. At 17, she entered her first talent competition and she lost. She lost to an accordionist. Sit with that for a second. One of the most powerful voices in music history couldn't beat an accordion player in a small local contest. That's the part almost nobody factors into her story. There was no fast track, no moment where someone immediately recognized what she had. She was a working-class teenager who got bullied, who lost her first competition, who worked ordinary jobs, and who had to fight her way onto stages one pub and one club at a time. Even after Lost in France and the surgery that changed her voice forever. Her real breakout with the new sound came through a song called It's a Heartache, which climbed all the way to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States. That's the moment the accident officially became an asset. Now, here's something else most people never connect. Her signature song didn't just have one moment of glory and fade away like most 80 seconds hits. Total Eclipse of the Heart kept getting rediscovered by entirely new generations of listeners, roughly once every decade. First as a defining rock anthem of the 80s, then as a karaoke and movie staple through the 90s and 2000 seconds, then again decades later through a collaboration with David Guetta that introduced her voice to an audience that hadn't even been born when the original came out. That's not luck. That's a voice so distinct that time itself couldn't dull it. There's more buried in her story that rarely gets talked about. Away from music entirely, she and her husband quietly built an enormous property portfolio over the years, at one point owning something like 22 houses across Berkshire and London, along with dozens of horse stables and farmland stretching from Portugal to New Zealand, land that eventually became a working dairy farm. The woman who left school at 16 with no qualifications, who once worked behind a supermarket till, ended up building a private empire most people never heard a word about. She also turned down chances most artists would have killed for. At one point, she was offered the opportunity to record the theme song for the James Bond film Never Say Never Again, and she said no. Imagine having the confidence, or maybe the instinct, to walk away from a Bond theme because it wasn't the right fit for the sound she'd built her name on later in life. The honors caught up with the woman who started out being mocked for her sister's old clothes. She received a Lifetime Achievement Steiger Award in 2005. In 2022, she was appointed MBE for her services to music. In between all of that, she represented the United Kingdom at Eurovision in 2013, nearly 3 decades after her breakout hit first climbed the charts, proving that whatever changed in her voice back in 1976 never once slowed her down. So what's the actual lesson buried inside this story? It's not really about a secret surgery or a broken vocal rest instruction. It's about what happens when something goes wrong in a way you never expected, and instead of hiding from it or trying to reverse it, you build your entire identity around it. Bonnie Tyler didn't get handed an iconic voice.